Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Community Services Committee meeting for Thursday, April 21st, 2022. I would like to acknowledge that we are convening on the traditional territories of the Shishalt and the Squamish First Nation, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. We have an agenda in front of us. Do we have any late or emerging items or any amendments to the agenda? I don't see any. Okay, could I get a motion to adopt the agenda as presented? Okay, motion seconded, and all those in favor? Thank you. Agenda adopted. We've got some delegations here, and the first delegation today is the New Brighton Dock Committee, and I believe we are welcoming Jamie McJanet, who will be presenting. Yeah, if you just want to, I see your microphone's already on, perfect. And we have a presentation that's in the agenda that you can kind of follow along with, but yeah, you've got 10 minutes, Jamie, and welcome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for receiving our delegation. As you likely know, this delegation is about the outstanding issue of the status of the New Brighton Dock on the southwest peninsula of Gambier Island, and this is our second delegation. Time has become a critical factor for us in this matter. Our first delegation was in December of 2020, and following that, as you're likely aware, a budget item of $25,000 was tabled and accepted to conduct, what I understand, as a business analysis and condition analysis of the dock. More than a year has passed since that time, and from our perspective, there has been no meaningful progress on the file. In the meantime, elements of the dock have begun to deteriorate. Safety issues are arising, and I want to point out that the Squamish Nation has been responsive to maintenance needs when we've raised, when I say we, I mean the community has raised those for them. But in practical terms, there has not been any preventive maintenance. And we're at a situation now where some members of the community are actually taking minor maintenance repairs on themselves to address some of those safety issues. So from our perspective, ownership and management of the dock needs to be resolved in a way that the facility is maintained as a safe public access for the long term. The community does wish to continue to work with the Squamish Nation and all levels of government to find an equitable and long-term solution that will see the dock maintained as a critical transportation hub and really what amounts to a lifeline for the provision of services to our community. And I want to make it clear that the Gambier Island Community Association is not necessarily asking the SCRD to take ownership solely on of the dock. That may be an option that's available. What we are asking is for the SCRD to be a champion for our community, to take a leadership role in finding that long-term solution. To that end, we would ask that some initial steps be taken, such as these. We would ask that the regional district engage in a public process to study options for the long-term survival of this dock as a public facility. We would ask that the regional district, obviously with the approval of the Squamish Nation, arrange for an inspection to be carried out so that the condition of the dock and any safety issues arising can now be known. We ask that there be continued staff-to-staff discussion between the SCRD and the Squamish Nation to find a way forward so that the interests of the Squamish Nation and the community can be satisfied. Finally, we ask that the SCRD communicate with the provincial government to explore funding alternatives so that the dock is ensured to exist as a public access facility for the long term. These requests that we're making are about providing needed services to a community, a small community, that is largely self-sustaining, that already relies on a small group of dedicated and hardworking volunteers to provide some amenities and services to our community itself. And some examples of that, I don't know how familiar you are with Gambier, but the principal example of that is our local community center. It's a fabulous building. It's a beautiful building that for several decades now has been operated and maintained by a small group of very hardworking volunteers. It's the social hub of our island. We have a Gambier fire equipment group, another group of volunteers which arranges for funding, provides and maintains strategically placed firefighting equipment around our peninsula. During the pandemic, a very small group of community-minded individuals developed a grocery group. They've since been recognized for their efforts, where they secured, delivered to Gambier via the New Brighton dock, groceries for those residents, and delivered to those residents groceries and supplies that people who were uncomfortable or unable to secure themselves because of the pandemic. Our experiences with these endeavors have made it clear to us that ownership and management of the dock is simply beyond the resources and capabilities that we have in our community and the small pool of volunteers that we're able to draw from. There's a few points that I would like to reiterate that you have heard before in our first delegation because they provide context about the importance and the nature of the facility itself. The New Brighton dock has provided critical access to the Southwest Peninsula for over 100 years. It doesn't generate any revenue. It's not supported by local taxation. It is not a recreational dock. Its essence is as a working facility. As you likely know, it provides the link between the BC Ferry Service and our provincially owned and maintained road system. Because it's relatively well sheltered and a deep water port, it provides local moorage for approximately 22 small vessels, many of which are used by local residents to commute to and from work. But most importantly, it provides critical access for the delivery of basic services, including emergency services, to our community. We don't have schools, we don't have shops, we don't have medical services. Access for our residents is by water to those things. And for the majority of the residents, that's through the New Brighton dock. We rely on that dock to get to work, to get to school, to get our groceries, to get our building supplies, and to get to the hospital. Similarly, infrastructure support in the form of BC Hydro crews, telecommunications crews, road maintenance crews, relies on that dock to get to us when they need to. So again, time has become a critical factor for us. The issue has now remained unresolved for a number of years. And the situation for us is one of limbo. The dock needs an engaged ownership and management system. We need the SCRD as a community, and we're asking the SCRD to take on a leadership role to resolve this situation in a long-term way so that public access is maintained and is safe. Thank you for your time. I'd like to try to answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you, Jamie. And that was a great little intro. I'm wondering if staff can just bring the board and the delegation and everybody here up to speed on what the board has resolved to do it up to this point, and then maybe we can use that as a stepping stone for the conversation. Does that work?
Thank you, Chair. I want to take this opportunity to thank the members of the Gambier Island Community Association and the New Brighton Dock Subcommittee and residents that are in the gallery and as well joining us online for taking the time to come today and just to present your request before the board. I was fortunate enough to join in a conversation with members of this group a few weeks ago, just to kind of meet people online and give an update of what little progress has happened to date. So in truth, they're right. There has not been progress on the New Brighton dock. As the board is aware, we do have the $25,000 that was approved in 2021 that we've carried forward into 2022 in order to facilitate a process to try and come up with a strategy to maintain the dock as a community dock. Our challenge has been capacity, which has been brought forward to the board several times in terms of trying to fill a position within our docks area so that we had a resource to be able to concentrate on this as well as other several impending projects that we have in our docks area. So last time I mentioned something, I totally jinxed myself, if I remember correctly. I did say that we were pretty close to hiring, and that one didn't happen. But so I'm glad to say that we have hired someone. They started a week ago, so unless I'm really jinxed, we do have some capacity now. Of course, it will take us a little bit of time to get up and running. But in the meantime, I've also started to do some research myself. So I recognize with very little background and very little information that it is a very complex situation that will have quite a few facets to it, including levels of government conversation, inspections, understanding the dock, probably understanding the broader context of docks on Gambier Island. So there's lots of things that we need to do, but the first thing I need to do when the staff is up and running is to scope out the work that we want to do. In the meantime, I've committed to the Community Association and the subcommittee to keep the lines of communication open. I have been in conversation with the Squamish Nation in the last month as well, confirming our intent to carry on and a leadership role in a community conversation, and they asked them for several pieces of information, so hopefully we're able to acquire that information on the dock. They continued to reiterate their desire to no longer own a dock, to divest themselves of a dock, and so it was great that I could again suggest that we were interested in a community conversation, and hopefully before they took any steps otherwise that they would be in touch with us, to which I did not get a commitment, but certainly the conversation lines are open. So that's a very long summary to say there's lots to be done. We have not done much to date, but we have a plan. At least we have a person. We'll put together a plan. The other comment that I will say is, as the board is aware, it is a year that I will do major inspections on our own ports, and I have requested of the Squamish Nation that permission to perhaps include that port in our major inspections. And hopefully we'll find some economies of scale with having so many inspections done at the same time. But that would be one step. It's a small step, but it is one step toward trying to get the information that we need in order to put all of the options together to come back to the board and the community with what we might be able to do here. So again, I'm with Mr. McJanet, happy to answer any questions that you might have at this point in time.
Thank you for that. And now I'll open it up to directors. I see Director Kroll's hand up.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Wearing several hats here, I'm also with the Marine Search and Rescue out of Gibsons, and we've attended a couple of events and used the facility there. Something that sort of immediately comes to mind, because dock maintenance is not cheap, and it's becoming increasingly more expensive, and it's becoming increasingly more vulnerable to climate change and the extreme weather we're receiving. So, just putting something out there is it worth maintaining that dock, or is it worth looking at what dock would best suit the needs of the community? And I'm sure you know Joseph Wright, he's the chair of the Gibsons Landing Harbor Authority. But it occurred to me on the number of times we've had to attend the Gambier Island facility, we have to use the lower float. We can't access the main pier. So it almost occurred to me that a dock such as they have from the government wharf to the concrete float in Gibsons, which would give you a vehicle ramp to get to a floating dock, which would provide access to smaller vessels, would probably be more resilient to climate change because the dock moves up and down with the tides. That dock originally was built for steamers and is, as a result, the height it's at. Most vehicles that arrive in Gambier have to use barges and the ramps, so you could perhaps combine both into one with one dock as opposed to maintaining two facilities. So I would just suggest that, you have a word with Mr. Wright because he's certainly well-versed on what they're doing in Gibson's. They're also working on an expansion of their float in Gibson's. So, long range, there may be potentially economies of scale. If you're bringing the equipment in to do one job, the other job's only 3 miles away, it'd probably save costs. So it's just a suggestion. The dock, I realize, is vital to the community, but it doesn't serve all marine environments. And I can reflect personally on 2 very sad incidents that occurred on that dock, partially because of the height of it. So it's just something to consider. But thank you for your report. And
Do you have anything to say to that, Jamie, or is it?
If you would like to build that for us. As matters stand, and these are, I appreciate those comments. These are conversations that I have a feeling will go on for quite some time in the future. At this point, we are not looking for anything new. We are wanting to maintain what we have. That is not to say that the best option might be to change what we currently have. But our goal right now, our focus right now, is to ensure that we maintain that access point. I myself am also a former search and rescue member, so I know exactly what you're speaking of. The facility at New Brighton is not the optimal facility. It's 100 years old, but it's what we have. And right now, that is our focus, to maintain that access. A variety of options will have to be considered, obviously. Moorage, foot ferry access via the Stormway, potentially barge ramp access. So your comments are well taken. But I want to make clear that we are at this point not looking so far ahead that we lose sight of what the main goal, which is to maintain the service that we currently have.
Thank you for that. Do you have a follow-up?
well, I've sat in on enough meetings when docks have come up, and we continually hear the increased costs of maintenance of them. So do and it's not specific to this dock, it's probably other docks. Do you keep putting Band-Aids on 80 to 100-year-old infrastructure, which becomes increasingly more expensive? Or do you bite the bullet and say, look, this is what we've got to do. In the long run, we're not going to keep putting on $100,000 Band-Aids. So it's, to your point, I know you want something, you need something now that's safe. But I think, with climate change and sea level rising, to repair what's there in 20 years or 100 years, it could be underwater. So,
Yeah, of course.
you need to look at long-range stuff.
Yeah.
And for someone who owns a marina, I'm quite sure you're well aware of, problems with docks and the costs of repairing them.
Yeah. We are open to any long-term solution that will solve this conundrum that we're currently in.
Okay. I saw Director Hiltz's hand up, but it's now down. Now it's back up again. The real hand. Oh my goodness. All right, Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Jamie, for the delegation and the folks joining us in person. I want to acknowledge that Islands Trustee Kate Stanford is here, and they all made the trip using the New Brighton facility. And I do look at the attendees list, and there is a host of Gambierians looking at it, and I understand that they Gambierites or Gambierians, I'm not exactly sure, but the Gambierites. And the community center, Barbara here looks after the community center, and they've set up a Zoom hotspot, I guess is what you might call it, for a hybrid meeting over there, so more people can participate, because internet access is also an issue that you've heard about on the islands. So thanks very much for taking the effort. And yeah, the lack of progress, is definitely felt. Yeah, for sure. And the islands itself, 2021 census, Area F grew by 400. Half of that is on the islands. So it's a changing environment there. So there's no question that there is an ongoing, continuing need. I have a question either from either side, staff or the delegation, on communications with the provincial government. Has anyone? The provincial government and the federal government has repeatedly say we're not interested. Federal government said 30 years ago we're not interested, and the provincial government has not. But BC Ferries, has anything been materializing out of that?
Staff, I guess, yeah?
Chairs, I can certainly speak on behalf of what I've been told by the individuals that are on the New Brighton Dock Committee, as well as our Islands Trust individual, is that there's certainly, from their perspective, Kate is having conversations with provincial representatives, has been kind enough, well, the committee's been kind enough as well to send me lots of documentation and names of people. So there are lots of conversations that have to happen, Director Hiltz, to your comment. And I think that I would affirm what the committee has said, in that this is a multi-government issue that needs to be dealt with, and hopefully the multi-level government approach to it. I think as board members, advocacy in that regards would be excellent, but we certainly we have a list of people we need to start some conversations with, and some of those have started, and certainly I'm sure that Kate would be pleased to approach the mic if you want to hear all the different chats that she's had, but she's very busy on behalf of the Community Association and the subcommittee.
Thank you. Oh, does Kate want to speak to that? Is that? All right.
Yes, just briefly through the chair. The Islands Trust is a provincial organization, so it gives us an opportunity, hopefully, to provide an access to provincial coordinating forces. There has been some reaching out by our Director of Trust Services about the dock. We're still looking for the right angle, the right person at the provincial level to provide ideas as to what directions to go in. Because there's no single authority for the New Brighton Dock, and that the province is also loath to consider what was formerly a federal facility. There does seem to be a bit of pushback, but I am speaking to BC Ferries, and in every case we're talking coordination, different levels or different ministries. How do they work together? Not saying that any one particular ministry has the right answer, has all of the capabilities to look at this dock. It's very complex, and we recognize that. So that's sort of where we're at right now. We're hoping to sort of build up that conversation, make it more active now that we have a better idea of which ministry to speak to. So thanks.
All right, thank you for that. I'll take a chance to make a comment, or maybe even have to ask a question. As a representative of Roberts Creek, who pays into our port authority and yet has no port in our own jurisdiction, I personally am also loath to take on another dock that we would then have to pay for through our port function. But I think that would be made a lot more palatable if maybe some of the other dock facilities on Gambier Island might be retired or taken down. And so, and I know that some parts of Gambier Island are not connected with other parts of Gambier Island, but I think a land connection in the long run would be much cheaper than maintaining dock facilities on several parts of the island. So I'm just wondering if that discussion has been had on Gambier, and if there are any contenders for docks that could be potentially retired and no longer maintained in the long run. Thanks.
The comment that I'd make to that is this. I think that is why a public process as part of the assessment of the New Brighton dock is so important. Because the smaller communities on Gambier and on most islands have built up historically around these docks. And so to me, it's not just an assessment of the fiscal outcome. I think there is a social value component that's very important to take into account. Docks like ours, in Gambier Harbor and West Bay, which are on our peninsula, are woven into the fabric of the community. They're more than just access points. And I think that needs to be taken into account. And so the public process, to me, is very important for that reason. The regional district and anybody who may end up as part of this solution, I feel, needs to hear from the people in the communities about the value of these facilities to the communities. So it is a conversation that I would be naive to say would not happen in the future, but I think that's a very important part of the process.
I think that was well said. Thank you. I see Director Pratt's hand up.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. And I do have docks and island communities within my community. So, and your words are very true about how each dock, the community that builds up around each dock is on an island is just, it's so different. And I think of North and South Thormanby just as two examples, and those are attached too, and it's a very small area, much smaller than Gambier. I'm wondering, I think there might be an opportunity with the changing of the ministries as of April 1st with Minister Osborne now, and I think there might be a potential opportunity now to maybe get some new names in government and some new life into things, because one thing that Minister Osborne has is she does have some of the Indigenous negotiations that do fall underneath her ministry as well. So and with her background in the ocean and being so closely connected and everything, I think it's going to be a fantastic opportunity moving forward, and it might be something that at the elected level that we could really connect to, Kate Louise, is maybe we should, this is something that we can take offline, because we're, and Minister Josie, so she's so approachable and everything, and so it might be a good time to strike while the iron is hot.
That's the plan. I'm not at the mic, but that is the ministry we are looking at, is the new ministry, and the new assistant deputy minister is who we're speaking with at the trust level. We just haven't made the exact meeting. But also I'd like to suggest I think we have a placeholder for Islands Trust SCRD meeting mid-May, so we can also bring that in.
Yes.
And hopefully have some information by then. Okay,
I'm wondering if we're maybe putting it too soon, but it would be great if we could invite an ADM somewhere along the way to join us as well, because this is definitely something that's of great concern to our community and to Islands Trust as well.
So we'll work offline with that.
Okay.
That's exactly what it's.
All right, for those of you that were maybe in the audience and couldn't hear what Kate Louise said, they're working on it. All right, Director McMahon.
That was a succinct summary. I'm just going to ask, this situation cannot possibly be unique to Gambier. This must be a problem that's replicating itself across the island communities. They all have docks. Is there an approach that people are taking to dealing with aging island infrastructure?
I'd rather go to the mic just because then people can hear on the meetings.
All right, back to Kate Louise.
So on other islands in the trust area, there's obviously a lot of docks. Many of those docks are community-led. They're supported through their regional districts, but they are not critical level docks. There's only one other dock that is similar to the Gambier Island scenario or to the New Brighton scenario, and that is on Lasqueti. It is a federal dock, and so far all attempts to divest of it to the regional district or to the community has been rebuffed, and they are still a federal dock. That is the closest to a similar situation. The other islands are serviced by BC Ferries and have car access, and that changes their status. They are then part of the provincial lease program with BC Ferries. So there isn't a similar scenario. The closest is Lasqueti, within the Islands Trust area anyways. But you're right, as far as costs for maintenance, it is something that all the owners of the local docks are looking at constantly.
All right, thank you for that. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. This limbo period, we don't know how long the limbo period is going to go on for. I'm going to say it's going to be more than a week and less than some years. And so in the interim, the maintenance aspect is, to keep the facility there. And Jamie, you mentioned some community involvement. And the question that it's to staff is that, I can't remember if it was you saying it, Shelley, or was someone else, your predecessor, about an agreement with the Squamish Marine Group that if there becomes a problem with the facility, that they will be approaching the SCRD in some way. That's sort of an understanding that I've had. Is that still an understanding between the regional district and the Squamish Marine Group in terms of, like, say there is a float sink or something like that, would they be approaching the regional district, or they would be doing it on their own?
Staff.
Thank you for the question. To my knowledge, there is no such agreement, whether handshake or in writing. The only conversation I'm aware of is in terms of divestiture of the dock itself, but not the maintenance. So the Marine Group still responds to community when the community rises or raises issues with the dock. And in some cases, I believe the community might be actually out there doing things. But as Mr. McJanet said, the nation has been responsive to the community's questions when issues have arisen. I think what is in absence perhaps is the ongoing repair and maintenance and just keeping on top of things from a life cycling perspective that seems to be lacking over the last couple of years. It's more responsive in nature, but I don't want to put words into that may not be true, so I'll look to Mr. McJanet for affirmation of that. Thank you.
I'm not aware of any such agreement. The Squamish Nation has been very responsive to date whenever we've raised maintenance issues. But I'm not aware of any agreement they may have with the SCRD.
Yeah, follow up.
I've been hearing the load capacity of the approach has become a greater issue. So has Squamish Marine Group investigated that aspect of the load rating? Is that was something that the regional district went through with many of its ports?
But when you say the approach, do you mean the pier head itself or the ramp?
Now we're talking port functions. Yeah, the approach is what attaches to the land, yeah.
I'm not aware of what the Squamish Nation has done to either assess that or address it. they did at the end of their term of contracted responsibilities resulting from the divestiture do quite a bit of work, including some work on the approach. But to the extent to which that itself was addressed, I don't know.
All right. I'm hoping to wrap this up fairly soon, but I see Director Seegers' hand up, and then maybe we can move towards maybe coming to a resolution after that.
Thank you. I think the directors around the table here right now are very cognizant of what the issues are. As you know, there's an election this fall, and you may not see the same people sitting at this table after that. So I would suggest that, while it is on staff's, work plan and on their radar, that you put it in your calendar that after the election and potentially once they've gotten settled in a few months, that you come back and be a delegation again to then maybe go into a little of the history for the board so that they're aware going forward. All right, thank you.
Thank you, duly noted.
Director Kroll, you had something quick to add, or?
I'll just be very quick, if I may. Thank you, Chair. Just for clarification, and I'm maybe misinformed, but it's my understanding that the Squamish Nation would really like to divest themselves of their commitment to that dock. Is that correct?
Yes, as far as we are aware, that's what's been communicated to us, yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. I think that the board here is very cognizant of the need for the new Brighton dock and the importance to the Gambier community of it. So I think there's, and I don't think the new board will have a different opinion on that. It's clearly the hub for Gambier Island. So the importance of it is certainly not being dismissed. And I do hope we can move forward now. Staff has kind of outlined their plan for the next little bit. Is that something that works? Do you feel like there's something missing there, or are we good to go at this point?
No, I think the plan, as I understand it, is closely aligned with what we've asked for, and so I think we're seeing some progress. It's, in that respect, it's positive from our point of view. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming in, and you're of course welcome to stay and hang around and look at our transit future action plan and other fun things. But if you wish to depart, that's also you're right. So we'll move on in the agenda to our next delegation with Rob Ringma and Frank He about our transit future action plan. Does staff want to do an intro on that?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to turn it over to our transit manager, Mr. Walton, to introduce our guests and our next agenda item. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, GM Gagnon, and good afternoon, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to present to you the 2022 Transit Future Action Plan, or as we like to say, the TFAP. The TFAP builds off of the 2014 Transit Future Plan's vision and uses current ridership data, demographics and development and growth, and also feedback from the community to identify future expansion opportunities and priorities for the conventional bus service for the next 5+ years. The project began back in February 2021 when the board adopted the terms of reference. And despite some stops, starts, and challenges incurred due to the pandemic, we are very pleased to present the 2022 TFAP to the board today. I would like to take this opportunity to thank members of the project working group that participated in helping to guide and champion this work, including the public engagement that occurred in the fall of 2021. Specifically, Megan and Marina from the District of Seashelt, Emma and Carrie from BC Ferries, Russell from the City of Powell River, Leslie Ann from the Town of Gibsons, and Jesse from the Seashelt Indian Government District. I also want to thank all the members of the public that took the time to provide valuable feedback for consideration in our planning processes. Staff is recommending that the board adopt the TFAP as a planning tool that will inform future SCRD transit priorities in planning with BC Transit. With that, I welcome Frank He and Rob Ringma from BC Transit to provide some highlights of the 2022 Transit Future Action Plan. And once they have once they've completed their presentation, we are available to answer any questions that you all may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Walton. All right, to Mr. Ringma and Mr. He, please.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to present today. I think Frank is going to bring up his presentation, and we'll start the presentation.
Thank you. So, is my presentation okay for everyone?
That's good.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, dear directors. Today, I'm grateful to present the Sunshine Coast TFAP, which will inform the transit planning vision and goals for the next 5 years. This plan will act as the planning tool to create a sustainable and reliable transit system for the community. Transit is an important component for the community's daily functioning, and BC Transit upholds the community's goals and objectives contained with the Sunshine Coast We Envision Plan, District Strategic Plan, and other regional sustainability and transportation plans to ensure that transit is a preferred choice for residents and visitors. And to achieve this vision, BC Transit's strategic goal provides the blueprint for how we facilitate the transformation and pursue our common vision of the future to create responsive and reliable services. BC Transit introduced 6 corporate priorities, including equity, diversity, inclusion, low carbon fleet program, digital on demand, electronic fare strategy, Next Ride, and BC Transit Development Referral Program. As of today, Sunshine Coast Transit System has seen a 22% ridership growth from 450,000 riders in 2014-15 to 550,000 riders in 2019 and 20, with 14 fleet vehicles, 31,000 annual service hours, and 5 routes. Route 90 and Route 1 are the commuter spine, which together contributes 85% of the system ridership. According to the Census 2021, the population in Sunshine Coast grew by 7.3% between 2016 and 2021, with 34% of residents are either youth or seniors. The transit mode share of commuting is estimated to be 6.5% at this time. Sunshine Coast Transit System has an AM peak and which is around 8 a.m. and PM peak around 3 p.m. Apart from these two, there is a later peak at 8 p.m. and again at 10 p.m., which may be due to passengers who tries to catch the last bus. The entire system witnessed a gradual increase in ridership after the major expansion happened back in 2017-18, when the Route 90 increased its peak hour frequency to approximately 30 minutes. On the route level performance, Route 1 performed significantly lower than Route 90 while operating on the same annual service hours. Because Route 1 and Route 90 share a large portion of its routes, could be a service optimization opportunity to attract more passengers by reallocating service hours from Route 1 to Route 90. And obviously, COVID has a greater impact on Route 1 and Route 90. Is also what we call the frequent transit network, where its ridership dropped 44% in 2020. This is due to the significant decrease in avoiding unessential interregional trips. And the average daily boardings for local routes 2, 3, and 4 recovered to around 90% of pre-COVID level at this time. In the Sunshine Coast Transit System, the transit ridership dropped significantly starting from March 2020 because of COVID, and the annual ridership recovered 8.8% in 2021 versus in 2020. Also, as an important component of this plan, BC Transit public engagement was carried out through the workshops, a transit operator survey, and an online public engagement platform launched from August 20th to September 70th, 2021. In conclusion, 840 people visited our website, 360 surveys were received, 792 comments was left on the webpage, and the response rate is 30%, which is significantly higher than the target 10% response rate. From our public engagement, the most people voted the increased frequency as their top priority. Evening service and bus stop amenities are the second and third highest priorities that they would like to see for our system. Based on the needs and challenges identified through the planning process and public feedback, the following service priorities were proposed to help shaping the Sunshine Coast transit system in the next 5 years. This is identified as the highest priorities in your system, and the list includes enhancement on Route 90, 1 and 2, more service optimization opportunities through performance monitoring, and improving existing connections. And the first one will be the Route 90. To balance the cost of increased frequencies on Route 90, we propose a two-phase scenario where phase 1 will offer 30-minute service from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays. And phase 2 will provide 30-minute service on weekdays for the entire service span. This is recommended that either phase 1 or phase 2 should be implemented with the modification of Route 1 to balance the service hour expansion and costs. After the modification, Route 1 will still be providing service between Field Road and Landale Terminal with limited service to downtown Seashore. This could align with either phase 1 or phase 2, and we also have to ensure that the change on Route 1 is appropriate when the Route 90 frequency is sufficient enough for our customers. Service optimization is an ongoing process to pursue opportunities to reallocate underperforming service to high ridership growth areas. And BC Transit will work with Sunshine Coast Regional District to improve existing connections through improved service frequencies on Route 90. Following proposed priorities are the increased frequency to Route 2 to 6 minutes from Monday to Saturday with 30 minutes at peak hours. And the Transit Future Plan also proposed that Route 2 would become a frequent transit network due to its existing population and future development. Another important improvement on Route 2 is to provide a bi-directional two-way service to save travelers' time and improve connections with other routes. For new service areas, BC Transit proposed a local flex route service in Panda Harbour with a separate connector service between Panda Harbour and Half Moon Bay. This is the most outstanding item from the 2014 TFP. Another new service is to provide connections between Seashore Half Moon Bay and the Earls Cove Ferry Terminal. For the infrastructure improvement, BC Transit would like to continue to improve bus stop amenities through BC Shelter Program. Operations and maintenance facility expansion will also be studied in a separate project to accommodate future expansions that could happen. Right sizing is to investigate the implementation of appropriate vehicle type and size for the ridership demand and add flexibility to serve more local communities. To achieve the goals of this plan, sustained capital and operating investments in the transit system will be required for the next 5 years and beyond. And annual service hours are projected to increase over 13,000 hours by 2029. And moving forward, performance of the system is monitored on an annual basis. And service improvements will integrate into the 3 years transit improvements process, which is also called TIPS. Prior to implementation of any service changes, BC Transit planning staff will work with the staff at the Sunshine Coast Regional District to ensure service improvements appropriately reflect the local needs. At the end, I would like to say that the development of this Transit Future Action Plan provides a roadmap for the continued development of Sunshine Coast Transit System. And BC Transit would like to thank the project working group members for their ongoing support and feedback. Next, I will pass it to Rob Rima, the Senior Government Relations Manager, to talk about the service expansion timeline and TIPS process.
Thank you, Frank. So, as Frank's just outlined, there's clearly been some priorities that have been identified within the Transit Future Action Plan. And a question that often comes up is, so how do we take those priorities and actually implement those? And that really is that transit improvement process. So think of the Transit Future Action Plan as the kind of overarching philosophical document that really comes back as a combination of stakeholder, public feedback, and working with local groups to really determine what that public feedback and stakeholder feedback is in terms of transit improvements that want to be seen within the community. We then take those, we look at how they're ranked in priorities. We talk to staff who clearly have communications with the board. And then we look at creating our transit improvement process. And that process starts, and it's well timed that we've got this TFAP in front of you right now, because that process basically starts here in April. And what we'll do is we'll refine the priorities that Frank has put together, and we'll actually put those into a 3-year plan. So we'll take the larger overarching TFAP and we'll break that down into a 3-year plan. And then what we will do, BC Transit will do, is in that transit improvement process, we'll actually cost out those initiatives. So in that transit improvement program MOU, we would come back to the board and say, from the TFAP, we've now defined what the next 3 years of priorities look like, and here are the costs. And as long as the Sunshine Coast Regional District is in agreement to the costs, their government share portion of the costs, then we take that and we submit that in our overall service plan to the province to try to get the matching funding from the province. The only time lag there is, and you see that at the bottom, so we would do that in October. We would get a signed MOU with the board in August. We would then submit that into our service plan in October, and then we have to wait for the provincial budget to be announced. And once the provincial budget's announced, if the province has decided to fund expansions, then we're able to move forward into an implementation process. And typically those implementation processes, you know, if you think about it, scheduling, let's take the example of the Route 1 and the Route 90. We increase frequency. We need to do all the scheduling work that's involved. Frank needs to do the planning work. We need to secure the fleet that's required. And we also need to do all of the marketing materials. So redoing the rider's guide, all of those pieces. And that process typically takes about 4 months. So the earliest that we can look at some implementation dates would be July of the following year. So yeah, that's kind of the process. And then obviously we implement those expansion items. So again, think of the TFAP as that overarching kind of guiding document. And think of the TIPS and the transit improvement program as a little bit more of kind of a shorter, agreed to 3-year plan that we could put into implementation. And I think that concludes our presentation today. Would look forward to any questions that you may have.
Great, thank you for that. I really appreciated the presentation that was also there on the agenda for perusal. It really was a good summary of everything that's going on. I will maybe if you can stop sharing your screen, and then we can have a look at who's got their hands up. I see Director McMahon, and we'll start with her.
Thank you. I have tons of questions. So one of my questions under what we heard, the top priorities of users of the system were number 1, more frequency, but number 2, more evening service. And I didn't see that reflected in this plan. It looks like we're going to help you get to work, but you can't have a life. So why the emphasis on daytime?
Yeah, thank you. That was actually a really, really great question. And I do want to say that we are trying our best to address all the needs and demands from our customers. And evening service was definitely one of the top ones on the list as well. So by increasing the service on Route 90, we're not only improving the frequency during the daytime, we're also improving the service in the daytime in our phase 2 scenario. So that will also increase the frequency for evening service. And then we will also, as Route 2, as one of our most demanded routes for the local coverage, we will also do improvements for that as well, especially during the evening. So that was also included in the whole process of our improvements for the whole system. So I do believe that was one of the very critical things that we would like to consider in the plan as well.
All right, follow up.
Actually, I have tons of questions.
All
I
right,
don't see
next
anybody
question.
else's hand up, so. Okay, also in the list of priorities, you mentioned in your presentation, but I didn't see it in the document that we have here, that our bus yard needs expanding. Can we actually do any of this expansion without the expansion of the Mason Road facility?
Maybe I can speak to that, Director McMahon. So we're currently in conversations with staff as well as with our BC Transit infrastructure team to look at different options regarding Mason Road. So I would say currently space is very tight. And again, you can refer to staff for a little bit more detail, probably post this meeting. We do have some room for limited expansion, but definitely the time is now to look at future opportunities for either additional bus space as well as potentially down the road needing to improve the facility to have additional maintenance capacity. So those things are being looked at right now. Just as early as this week, we met with staff and our infrastructure team to talk about scenarios and options. And I'm sure this board will see some of those in the very near future. When I see a staff follow-up.
Yeah, staff has a follow-up.
Thank you, Board Chair. It is actually reflected under infrastructure priorities on, it's called Operations and Maintenance Facility Expansion. So it is there in the TFAP. It's also in my work plan for this year. So the board did approve a priority for us to be looking at that. And I too just wanted to emphasize my thanks to BC Transit. We've actually started this conversation in the fall. And because we started this conversation in the fall, I caught on a little late to tips, but I'm getting there. They were able as well to set aside and look at this as a priority. So we, as Mr. Rigma said, had a great conversation yesterday about planning for transit, the yards expansion. I would also like to add, in conversation with Manager Walton, we believe that we could accomplish probably the first 3 years of priorities that are in the TFAP within our existing area. At that point in time, we'll start to feel the pinch. So we are very pleased to be working on the expansion plans now, because we know that that is not going to happen in a week, and it's probably going to be in the estimate of years to maybe get that expansion phased in and operating with more room. So it's a priority, and we're very pleased to have BC Transit on board for that.
Thank you, staff. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. And I'm picking up on the infrastructure priorities and exchanges. I think of like the Kootenay Loop in Vancouver, or how big is an exchange? Does it need land? Is it what amount of infrastructure goes into a field road or an Upper Gibson's exchange? Thanks.
Yeah, through the chair, Director Hills, thank you for your question. Typically, when we identify infrastructure needs, what we'll typically do is look at doing a feasibility study or getting a consultant in to look at what the actual requirements of that space would be. So we would probably, again, work with our infrastructure team and some outside consultants to look at the projected growth of the system, what would be required, the number of buses, the number of routes, all of those types of pieces. So kind of a complicated answer, but it really depends from system to system on what your needs are and how far out we want to plan for. Once we've identified that as a need, and we've gotten some groundwork done there through consultation and budgeting, then typically what BC Transit would do is, again, utilize our infrastructure team and try to put a program or a project term sheet together where we could, again, go and source provincial and federal funding to potentially help subsidize the cost of that infrastructure. And again, board would be very heavily involved in that process as we go through it.
All right, thanks for that. Director Seegers.
Thank you. So you've laid out the service priorities, and you've got blocks of 4 years, for example. Who determines in what years those show up? I'm looking on number 9. first page of number 9, service priorities 2022 to 2026. It talks about phase 1, Route 90, phase 2, Route 90, and then a modification of Route 1. The next page then talks about increased frequency to Route 2. So what if the board was to say, and I mean, I'm not saying we're going here, but what if the board was to say, okay, we want phase 1, phase 2, and increased frequency to Route 2 happen in the first year? Is that a decision that happens at this table? Does it happen in dialogue? Is it, at what point does that decision get made about what we're looking at moving forward?
Yes, through the chair. Thank you, Ms. Segrets, for your question. A very good question. Again, going back to kind of I only got one little piece of this presentation. Frank had to do a lot of heavy lifting. Going back to that part of the presentation, it really is right now in this TIPS process. So what happens is we will work with staff. We'll go to staff and say, here's the priorities that through our public and stakeholder engagement was outlined as the key priorities. Is that what staff desires us to bring back to the board? Clearly, there will be a conversation with the board about if these priorities are in the order that they want them to be. If there is some shuffling or let's say even stacking of priorities, I've had some systems that want to be very, very aggressive and they want to take year 1 and year 2 and combine them into 1 year. That is what happens through that TIPS process. And we kind of refine it. We go back and forth a couple times. We make sure we have it right before we fully cost it. And we come back to the board with the costing. And it's at that point where we bring that TIPS MOU, which is those initiatives that the SCRD has selected as their priorities or key priorities, that we'll also have some discussions about cost, because clearly cost has to be taken into effect for any of those types of decisions.
Yeah. Follow up.
So I don't see any years allocated to these. It's got a 4-year span. It doesn't say phase 1 is for 2022 or 2023. And phase 2 is 2024. So where are the years that you're talking about when you're saying, these are the years where we'd be looking at implementing that? I do remember that being in the Transit Future Plan. There were years outlined, but I don't see that in here.
Yeah, and Frank can maybe speak a little bit to it. These initiatives will be outlined in terms of what we saw from public engagement and stakeholder feedback as in terms of priorities, not necessarily in years. And to your previous question, it really is up to the SCRD to decide how many of those initiatives they want to accomplish in year 1 or year 2 or year 3.
Okay,
Yeah.
so further follow-up to that. I understand where you're going with that. So when this comes back to us with the costing, is that the opportunity at that point where we as a board will weigh in and say, yes, we're okay with this cost and this cost, put it in our budget, go forward with it? Or is that already too late?
No, it's not too late by any means. I think the key piece is what BC Transit would like to do is get a good understanding from staff and the board of what they see if they're in alignment with these priorities and what they see as those priorities, so that we can cost the most pertinent ones first, and then we can cost those other ones down the road.
We'll go to staff first, and then I'll have a question.
Thank you, Chair. So step 1 is adopting the tool as your planning tool. And then we subsequently, shortly thereafter, once you've had time to read through it and absorb it, if the board wants to direct staff at that time in terms of what they see their priorities to be, what they would like to see accomplished over the next 3 years, then the time to do that is in the next few weeks. So at a subsequent, or maybe even, the meetings in May, so that I can begin conversations with BC Transit, so that when they come forward with the MOU, they will have done the costing around that. Then you can say, yes, we're in, no, we're not. And that aligns with both of our budget cycles, actually, interestingly enough, because that's when the fall I'd be putting together my budget proposals, and same with BC Transit. So I hope that's provided some answers in terms of timing, because I know that's always, I'm still learning it too, but it is a confusing, TIPS program is interesting. So, but this is very timely right now having this meeting, so.
Thank you. Yeah, it's sort of adjacent to what Director Seeger was just saying. My question is around the flexibility in this plan, because we had a workshop recently and it was outlined to us that programs like Next Ride and the electronic fare strategy and digital on demand will bring a whole lot more data to us that wasn't there before. And some of the things that are not identified now may actually be not that high on the priority list once we actually have a bit more data. And so I'm wondering as to how moldable that Transit Future Action Plan is, or and how easy it is to modify it when that new information becomes available. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take a quick stab at answering your question, and then Frank might have some additional information. This is not BC Transit's plan. This is our plan, BC Transit and the SCRD. So at the end of the day, local governments through the BC Transit Act have the final say on transit decisions within their communities. So it is, again, a visionary document, outlines some of those priorities, but it is this board here that will have the ultimate last decision on what transit initiatives do get implemented and in what order within your community.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that is that this plan is more act as the roadmap for the whole transit system, and it was identified based on the current information that we have, and we do taken those like high-tech informations into consideration, like the next slide. We do understand that will bring us to another level of information that we can understand the system better than any time before. So from an annual review basis, we will be reviewing the performance of the system and saying, okay, so this year what we want to present to the board, and is these priorities are still kind of like make sense in that case. So we will be conducting our ongoing annual review for the system as well. So I'm not saying that the roadmap is not important. That is pretty important because that lies out the future, like 5 years from now. But we also have to be taking care of the changes, because things have been changing so quickly, especially after the COVID. We've been experiencing a lot of like ups and downs. So those are also the factors we have to take into quick consideration for the short term as well.
Thank you. Sounds like there's some flexibility in that plan then. That's great. Director Kroll.
Thank you, Chair. Just one very quick question at this point. Is there any sort of timeline that we might envision to see alternate fuel vehicles on the coast?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. As you may or may not be aware, BC Transit does have a low carbon fleet program that is aligned to the BC Clean program. So we're currently developing that right now. We do have a mandate, or we've set a goal, a strategic target goal of reducing, actually eliminating all of our heavy duty diesel buses by 2040. Pretty aggressive target, but it is one that we've set. It's a complicated process. As you can imagine, not only do you need to source battery electric buses, but you also need to make sure that you have the charging infrastructure and all the other ancillary infrastructure that's puts you in a position to do that. So our fleet team, our infrastructure team are working through a very large Gantt chart right now, looking at all of our buses across the province, all of our infrastructure and facility requirements, and developing kind of a rollout implementation plan at this time. But we do definitely have a low carbon fleet program with goals that would see us rolling out electric buses across the province.
All right, thanks for that. And Director McMahon.
Okay, under item 11, I see that the Seashell Park and Ride, like a zombie, has popped up from the grave again. My recollection is that we made a pretty serious effort to see if we could get that together, and there were two problems. One is that while lots of people think it's a nice idea, it's not really clear how much demand there would be for it, but the real problem is there's simply no place to put one. There is absolutely no place. And putting it in the plan is nice, but that's not going to create, you know, a space in downtown Sechelt that meets all the requirements of a park and ride. So, you know, I kind of question putting that in the plan when I don't think there's any realistic possibility of it happening. Not unless something very significant changed in Sechelt, like somebody built a 7-story parkade. Not happening, says the mayor.
I was going to make that comment myself, but yeah, I think Director Ryan, you bring up a good point. I think infrastructure. There's lots of things on the infrastructure wish list. Again, this board's kind of our key local, experts to really vet some of these different pieces. And if they're not feasible, they, clearly they're not going to fall high on the priority list. We're going to want to focus on the pieces of that roadmap that are the most feasible and the most effective. And we'll start there, and we look forward to getting your feedback and obviously your experience on where those pieces may be. Frank, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was kind of like, I just want to echo with what Robert just mentioned, is that we do want to provide all the options. We don't want to say, okay, that is simply a no. So that's kind of like not something that we want to do with the Transit Future Action Plan, but is that we will be focusing on more feasible options, definitely. So if that's something that we do not see that in the foreseeable future, maybe that's not very high on our list as well.
All right, thank you. You've got some more questions, Director McMahon? Okay.
Oh, sure. So somewhere in here I saw Route 5, which actually sounds to me like a really good idea from my inexpert point of view, but it's a cost-neutral option, so why is it far down on the priority list?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. For now, we could bring it up. It's just like that will be still served the same as the Route 1, because for at the beginning of the stage, it will operate just like our modification plan for the Route 1. It will operate as the same bus. It will operate down from the Landale terminal all the way down to downtown Gibsons, and then it will still be the same bus, but with a different number. So we do feel like that could cause some kind of confusion to begin with. But when we come to that point that we think, okay, we need more frequencies to that area, that's when we actually transfer that route into 2 separate parts, where Route 1 will only serve between the downtown town of Gibsons all the way to the Field Road. And Route 5 will become maybe a more frequent route, so that it will have maybe a lighter vehicles to serve for those areas, but with a higher frequency. So that's when we will actually see the changes happening. But right now, as of the ridership demand that we see, we do feel like to increase the frequencies on Route 90s to make it like a 13 minutes frequency all day long will be a more urgent priorities for the transit system. Then only provides us the ability to adjust to the various schedules, because we are kind of like, throughout the whole year, we have to do multiple seasonal changes just to match up with the various schedule. And that really ties our hands to give us the ability to make real changes to the system at this time. So for that can actually give this system a lot more viability to create a lot more things. And that also gives us the ability to build a more resilient transit system when we are experiencing like a various delay at that time. Then maybe that's when we will have a better, more robust transit system. Thank you.
And sorry, if I could just add one more point there, Chair, that Frank touched on. So he mentioned the ferry schedules, and he's correct. We spend an awful lot of time, BC Transit and staff, working on rescheduling a lot of the system in order to align to the BC Ferries schedule that changes quite frequently, typically at least 4 times a year. And as we just saw, even in this spring, if we want to call this spring, it's still pretty wet and cold as far as I'm concerned, but this spring where they, due to staffing shortages, changed their schedule on the fly on us, which really actually is very difficult for us to adjust to. So one of the other reasons why you see the Route 1 and the Route 90, not only did it come back as very high in the feedback, but also operationally, if we can move to a more frequent service on those routes, we actually eliminate the need to be adjusting our schedule all year round, because we can have solace that when somebody gets off a ferry, even if they just missed the last bus, no more than 30 minutes later, there'll be another bus coming, and it really frees us and uncouples us from needing to rely on BC Ferries dictating our schedule, and we can move more towards us dictating our own schedule, making sure we're providing the service that the people are looking for.
All right, Director McMahon, once again.
Oh, yeah. Told you I had lots of questions. So on-demand transit, what we heard in our workshop with you was that BC Transit is trying to find a model that will work across the province. I personally have some skepticism about whether there is a one-size-fits-all solution on that particular item, because each community is so different, geographically and demographically. There's some folks in our community who are really interested in trying a pilot project here on transit in demand. Is there any reason why we couldn't get together, the SCRD and the community, and try something out?
Thank you, Director McMahon, through the chair. So just to clarify, not a one-size-fits-all option for the province. We recognize that, as we do when we do transit planning, every unique community that we provide transit services in has its own unique needs. What you might have heard in that board workshop is we need one platform in terms of a digital platform, selecting a bus type, those types of things that give us the economies of scale that we're able to deliver as an organization to the communities that we work with. So that's kind of a little bit of that, similarity between systems. We've just currently finished 2 feasibility studies in Cranbrook and Kelowna, looking at really where does on-demand transit work best, where does it maybe not work as well. So that's given us some really solid insights. We are continuing to roll out next year the following year into 2 pilot communities. So I can just tell this board, I have put the SCRD forward as a potential candidate for one of those pilots. As you can imagine, there's probably a fairly long list of communities that have put forward for that, but we have just working with staff and knowing that there is some desire there, we have put that forward. But really the big piece with on-demand transit is it works well in certain circumstances. It doesn't work well in other circumstances. Where we've seen where it really works well, low ridership areas where we can tie it into, say, a Route 90 and a Route 1. So we can service a small area and bring people to the main services to be able to get them access to those services. Long distance routing, it's been proven through not only our feasibility studies, but also studies across Canada. Long distances or even high, I'll use long distances, is not where it's most efficient, and also high ridership areas is not where it's most efficient, and it's still better to provide a conventional transit service. So long-winded answer, I apologize, but we definitely have the Sunshine Coast Regional District kind of on the radar. Again, you are free to look to other options that you may want to develop. They just wouldn't come with BC Transit supplied funding along with them. But yeah, we're definitely looking at all options. And if this is something the board's interested in, we'll definitely continue that dialogue with staff.
Thank you. I think I will ask community members to get in touch with staff to look at some of the options that are under discussion. I have a couple more. Bus shelters. Are we required to source them from BC Transit, or can we make our own?
Thank you for the question. Director McMahon, through the chair, no, you can source your own bus shelters. We have some communities that have come up with very customized individual bus shelters that work best within their communities. But you would be on your own in terms of the cost and the delivery of said shelters. We would probably want to just work very closely with you and make sure that you are adhering to kind of our bus stop specifications. Obviously, we don't want a bus shelter that's overhanging onto the road and the first time the bus goes by, it clips the bus shelter. But we would actively work with you on that. The benefits of using the BC Transit bus shelter program is that we can typically get the cost of our shelters if we provide the provincial funding, which is about 50%, as well as some federal funding. We can, in some cases, get that shelter down to about 20% of the total landed cost. The one challenge with our program is we can only purchase so many shelters. Again, multiple communities wanting multiple shelters, and typically a community will get 1 to 2 shelters a year through that program, which sometimes does not satisfy the need. And then they have the option of either doing their own shelter or purchasing another BC Transit shelter at full price. And after you've got something at 20%, it looks rather expensive at full price.
I'll say it really does look expensive because we've gone and looked at the price tag on those bus shelters. So finally, at some point, might we review the possibility of a taxi saver program here? I was asked that. I know that it's been looked at in the past and wasn't very feasible, but times change. It could become...
Yes, that is something I would absolutely work with staff on when we look at different additional support mechanisms to support the custom transit system. So yes, that's absolutely something we could explore.
All right. Well, Director McMahon has had her fill of questions fulfilled, but I see Director Seeger's hands is up.
Thank you. So I'm going to revisit, and this will be with our staff. At what point or how are you going to be looking for input from us on the recommendations that are in this plan to say, yes, we want costing on this, or no, we don't want costing on that?
Thank you for the question. So once the plan is adopted as a planning tool, then I would look for board direction at that point in time. So whether you want to bring forward direction at a next meeting or the meeting thereafter. Staff is comfortable with the priorities the way that they are in terms of what we know we can achieve within the space that we have within the first 3 years in the order. So we would be looking at, in terms of the 3-year plan, the first 3, I believe, that are on the list would fall into our 3-year plan. But if the board wants to rearrange that priority, then we would look for board direction for that soon, within the next month, let's say.
All right, thank you. All right, I don't see any more hands up on the speakers list. I would like to thank Frank He and Rob Ringma, or did Director Seegers want to say something?
Well, is it time now to make these recommendations on page 4?
We do have to receive the reports.
Yes.
Yes, if the board would be willing to pass a motion to receive the document and adopt it as a planning tool, that would be great. If they have further direction to provide in terms of having a workshop or a separate session that you want to vet out the priorities, I would, this may be the time to talk about that as well. Or if we want to bring that forward to a different meeting, that's fine. But yes, definitely step 1 would be to adopt the motion as presented on page 4. Thank you.
Well, I thought that we would finish the delegation first and then maybe receive all the reports. But okay, we can. I guess I'll start with the motion to receive all the reports first. Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor? All right, and now that we have the reports, we can actually go to page 4, and you wish to move the motions as listed on page 4, Director Seegers, or
Yes,
would you like
please.
to amend?
I'll pass that first, thank you.
Okay, anybody want to second that? Okay, we've got some seconders. All right, more focused discussion on that? All those in favor then? All right, perfect, thank you. Is there anything that the directors would like to ask from our delegation? Director Seegers?
Not from the delegation, I'd like to ask the board. The directors, how would you like to proceed with this? Do we have enough information now to give direction to staff, or do we want to wait a week and have a special meeting on this? How would you like to proceed? I think we've got a short window here to give some guidance to staff to move stuff forward. How would you like to deal with that?
All right, Director McMahon, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, afraid I thought of another question, but I'm not sure how many more meetings we actually need. My only concern is if there are any options that we are closing off when we approve the plan, right? If the approval of the plan means that there's stuff that we can't do in the next 5 years, then that's just something that I want to be aware of. My question actually was about the was it the next bus? I thought it was coming this fall, and I think in the current presentation it said next year. What's the timeline on the next bus and the electronic fares?
Thank you, Chair. The next ride is right around the corner. So we will be looking at the installation of equipment on buses and doing some public promotion in the very near future. And then the payment on demand or automatic payment, I believe, is toward the end of this year. Thank you.
All right, and all right, I see hands are down, but are we still looking for a resolution here by the board as to what we would like to do with this, or whether we need anything else at this point? Director Seegers?
Thank you. Okay, nobody else is speaking up. I'll throw some stuff out and then you can shoot it down or move it forward. On page 25 in our presentation, no, sorry, let's go 24 first. Talks about phase 1, Route 90 increase to 30 minutes. That would be weekdays, I believe, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So I'm going to propose that we get pricing on this. I'm not saying we move forward with these at this point, but let's look at some pricing so that we can look at implementation. So phase 1, phase 2, modification of Route 1, and then new service to Pender Harbor, new service to Earls Cove Ferry Terminal, Egmont. I think that will also help our counterparts in Cathat. I'd also throw in increased frequency to route to Seashell to 60 minutes Monday to Friday, 30 minutes peak times. Not bi-directional. We're not ready for bi-directional. We have a lot of building going on in West Seashell right now. I think that would be down the road. Once Trellis, for example, is up and running, there's going to be a need for bi-directional service at that point. But they will be getting shovels in the ground next month. So we're looking at a couple of years out. All right. Take it away.
All right. I'm not clear if my thoughts on this. I would almost rather leave this up to the experts as to when all of this gets rolled out, but and what the timing of it. Those are just my thoughts. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'm not really clear on process either, because I'm not sure how much staff work is involved in the pricing. And I think what we're looking for is a very rough estimate, like within the nearest $100,000 or something. That what are we looking at? Because it's hard to say, are we looking at $50,000 or $500,000 or $5 million, right? Thanks.
Staff?
Thank you. So if I may just paraphrase, did I hear you correctly in that you want to move forward with phase 1, phase 2, modification of Route 1? So those would be what we would take over anyways, that's what would be coming forward with the TIPS program for year 1, year 2. Year 3 probably would have taken us into the increased frequency to Route 2. So I would suspect those will be part of the three-year phasing in the TIPS that you will receive come August. What wouldn't be in there is the Pender Harbor and Earls Cove. So what I can do is I can go back, have conversations with BC Transit about what that might look like, because obviously the first phase, as I believe Mr. Rigma alluded to, is some feasibility studies. So we could look at that being in that, because I hear you saying in a 3-year cycle, you would like to look at these. So I will go back and have conversations with BC Transit around what is feasible within 3 years, what we could include in that TIPS to come back and get his feedback on that.
All right, follow up.
Yeah, the reason I'm looking at particularly the Earls Cove Ferry Terminal is I know that there's a lot of work happening up in the Powell River area in a line to the ferry from their end. And this is the missing piece, is to get that piece in there so that they actually can get to Vancouver and back, for example, without having to drive. Right, thanks.
All right, Director McMahon.
Of course, the other part of this all is Mason Road. So is there likely to be a budget proposal around Mason Road coming up for next year's budget?
Oh, sorry, I left my mic on. Thank you. Thank you for the question. I don't think you'll see a budget proposal for Mason Yard next year, because I don't think we'll be that far. I would suggest that you'll probably see a budget proposal for 2024 that will look at a phased approach. So what we need to consider right now in terms of our TIPS and our expansion is what can we reasonably support within our existing infrastructure, which, as I mentioned, I think the phase 1 and the phase 2, we can do that. Feasibility studies aren't adding buses. It's really doing the planning behind it. The Route 2, that might be where we start to hit a pinch point, but we'll have discussions with BC Transit. And again, that the infrastructure behind it, the Mason Yards, that's definitely going to be a phased approach over a long period of time, because we're looking at that in the long haul, like 25 years plus. What do we need? Thank you.
All right, Director Pratt.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be supportive of pushing the Earls Cove, the Pender Harbor Earls Cove thing along, because that one has just it's been sitting and it's been hanging forever, and it's certainly something we've heard from Cotat, from Powell River, but especially from Area A for a very, very long time. And while it's not really feasible to provide inter-area A transportation along all because there's so many routes that go, when you think about Garden Bay and Egmont and everything, but if we can provide that spine and then go from there. But I think if we can really concentrate on actually just biting the bullet and doing it, and looking again at what that cost is really going to be, because that's going to have a significant impact on a large number of residents, not just within the lower Sunshine Coast, but up in the upper Sunshine Coast too.
I do believe that that's only a once a day thing that's planned right now. So I don't know how huge that impact will be. I think it'll probably hit one of the midday ferries coming from Earls Cove. But yeah, that's my understanding. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Do you have a follow-up on that, Director Pratt? Or?
Even if it is only once a day, it's better than nothing, and it's much better than what they have right now.
Okay. Director Sears. Oh, staff first. Okay.
Sorry, thank you very much. So I definitely will go back and we'll have this conversation with BC Transit about that, because I think the underlying is that we need to start planning, because to actually implement is several years. So the longer we take to plan, the further it is out. And we all know that something like this is not isolated to SCRD. This type of planning is interjurisdictional. So it definitely will take some time to get that organized. So I appreciate the feedback and the direction, and I'll be having some conversations. Thank you.
All right, Director Seegers.
Thank you. So for those board members who have not actually sat through this process, because we did this back in when we did the 2014, there's a few pieces that are up in the air around this. One is, are we willing to tax our residents to implement these once we know what the cost is? And that's going to come back to us at budget time. Next piece is the provincial government willing to kick their piece in order to move these forward? But in the end, we actually have some dollar amount so that we can do some planning in the transit department for the long-range goals that we're looking to achieve. So the information will be very valuable to us to move the transit system forward. Thanks.
Okay. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, actually, 1 second. It looks like Mr. Ringma has something to say to that.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Just to Director Seegers, sorry. You are correct. So the way the BC Transit Act works is once the local government has approved of the costed out transit initiatives, that's the activation for us to then go to the province for the matching funding. So you have a very good kind of understanding of how that process works. But I want to make clear that before we can go to the province for matching funding, we need a commitment through a transit improvement MOU with the local government for their portion of the cost of the initiatives that they've decided they want to move forward with. Thank you.
My apologies, Director Lee. Now it's your turn.
No problem. I was trying to understand how this thing would roll out. There is a desire in the Pender Harbour area to have a bus service once a day to Sea Shelton back, but that doesn't sound like what we're talking about here. But there is also a desire to have a bus that will take you to Vancouver and then bring you back the next day. And I think that might be what we're talking about here. And so I need to understand, I think the community needs to understand the plan, but then the cost. And I know that we had a bus that didn't pan out because we couldn't support it with the fares. So I was kind of hoping that something that worked with Paul River and us would give us something as a starting point. I'm hoping that's what staff are looking at, actually.
So just to clarify, Director Lee, are you talking about that Powell River also supports the funding of that route?
Yes, I was thinking if Paul River was supporting the funding along with perhaps something from Pender as a contribution, that it might work.
Okay, I'm not sure. Staff, do you have any thoughts on that?
So just for clarity, and I certainly can get confirmation from Mr. Rigma, but what I heard Director Seegers said was come back through the TIPS program and look at the costing around the new service to Pender Harbour, which is outlined in the service priorities, and also then look at the planning for the service to Earls Cove Ferry, because that's really around interjurisdictional discussions, etc. But I don't believe that the service to Pender Harbour requires that type of consultation. It's a service that would be within the SCRD's jurisdiction to provide. So you're looking for costing around that within the 3-year TIPS program. And within the 3-year TIPS program, you're looking to start planning the feasibility around that expanded service up to Earls Cove Terminal Egmont, because that could be an interjurisdictional discussion around cost sharing, etc. That's the way I interpreted that. So if that's correct, hopefully that's provides some clarity as well, Director Lee.
All right, I saw Mr. Ingmar's hand up, but it's down again, and so we're good. Okay, all right. I guess, does that conclude this topic at this point in time? Can we say thank you to our delegation? And it sounds like sort of the level of direction that was given by Director Seegers seems to suffice. We don't need a motion or anything? No? Okay, good. Well, thank you so much for coming, Mr. He and Mr. Ingma, and we'll move on in our agenda, and we'll say goodbye to you at this point. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay. Let me just get back to my top of my agenda here. All right. We have received all the reports, so now we'll go to, I believe, Annex A and Annex B were as part of the delegations. Does anybody feel any need to revisit Annex A or Annex B at this point? No? Okay. So we'll go with Annex C, Recreation Sites and Trails BC Partnership Agreement Renewal for Dakota Ridge. To staff. Is that Mr. Clarkson?
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon. On October 1st, 2010, the SCRD entered into a 10-year partnership agreement with the province of British Columbia for the management and maintenance of Dakota Ridge Winter Recreation Area. In December 2021, RSTBC, Recreation Sites and Trails BC, sent a new agreement to SCRD for renewal and review for a further 5 years. The renewal of the Dakota Ridge Partnership Agreement will allow SCRD to manage, operate, and maintain the recreation facility in accordance to all applicable laws, regulations, and standards. Dakota Ridge and other provincial recreation sites like Sprockets, Big Tree, and Homesite Creek Secret Cove Falls trails are similarly managed through partnership agreements with the province. Upon review of the renewed partnership agreement being offered, staff have prepared two options for consideration by the committee. Option one being that the SCRD renew the provincial partnership agreement for Dakota Ridge with Recreation Sites and Trails BC for a further 5-year term. This is the staff recommended option. Option two would be to decline the offer for agreement renewal. Dakota Ridge is an important local recreational amenity, offering residents and visitors a variety of outdoor recreation opportunities all year and especially during the winter season. Staff recommend renewing the agreement for a further 5-year term. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks for that. Does any of the directors? Here we go. Director McMahon.
You will be delighted to hear that I have no questions this time. I was going to move the recommendations on page 39.
We have several seconders. Okay. Any further questions on that? No, I don't see any. All right. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Thanks for that. We'll move on to Annex D. And that is the Dakota Winter Recreation Area exploration of a new partnership agreement. And is that back to Mr. Clarkson?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So on February 24th, 2022, following a delegation by representatives of the Dakota Ridge Volunteer Group, the SCRD board directed that staff begin discussions with the volunteer representatives in order to explore the possibility of volunteers taking an increased role in providing the Dakota Ridge service. The board also requested that staff report back to future Community Services Committee prior to the end of Q3 of 2022. So since February, staff have met with the newly formed and registered Dakota Ridge Recreation Society. We've assessed together the emerging opportunity in order to gain a further understanding of the group's desired involvement in the operations of Dakota Ridge, as well as their proposed timing. The group is keen to get more involved, but also wants to approach things in a slow and sustainable manner. So throughout these discussions, the Dakota Ridge Recreation Society has outlined the following priorities for possible implementation during the 2022-2023 winter recreation season. So they'd like to play an increased role in the recruitment, orientation, and training, scheduling and coordination, as well as recognition of the volunteer hosts and the groomers at Dakota Ridge. They are also looking at taking responsibility to help organize and volunteer work parties during the off season to help maintain the facility and support community investment. Staff recognize that the Dakota Ridge Recreation Society has the potential to improve and enhance aspects of the operation. Staff are supportive of this important initiative and anticipate working closely with the Society to develop an agreement which defines roles and responsibilities. Staff anticipate bringing a report forward to the board in September 22, seeking approval to enter into a new partnership agreement with the Dakota Ridge Recreation Society for the 2022-2023 recreation season. Thank you very much.
Thank you to staff, and I certainly welcome this report, and I think it's a great idea, and I would also like to thank all those behind the initiative for coming to staff. Do any of the directors, staff, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I'm trying to find how to raise my hand on the computer. I just wanted to add, the reason this is coming forward is not only to give you the information that we're working towards a partnership agreement, but it's also to note that it was not on our work plan. So we had to look at our work plan and decide, because this will be a significant amount of work, what couldn't happen. So we had identified in our service plan for Dakota Ridge that we would be doing some asset management planning, and we've decided that in order to make time to dedicate to this important initiative, that we'll move that out to a future year. So I think that's important because you'll see that reflected in our quarterly reports as we report back on our priorities that were identified in our service plan. So I just wanted to highlight that for you. Thank you. Okay, thank you for that. Asset management is certainly important as well. So, but I do think that this will free up some staff time in the future. Maybe not this year, but certainly in the future as time goes on. Director Pat.
Thank you. Thank you, GM Gagnon, for highlighting that as well. That is important to note. But you know, it's the part of the management of this asset is because it is so volunteer heavy. So that to me, it's like the volunteer asset management of our volunteers. So so I completely understand that and completely and appreciate the comments brought back, so that we are aware when it does come back of like, oh, why not? And it's like, well, remember when you said we needed to do this, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this moves forward, and I think it's a really positive step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Pat. Director Hills.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, that was highlighted. So not 2022, 2023 or something in the future, and I'm supportive of it. I'm just trying to understand what the trade-off totally involves. Like, so asset management isn't done, service review isn't done. So what's the loss in not having those items done? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. I think the loss is further deterioration of assets, that because we were not necessarily investing in them properly. An example is the road. You know, we have minimal investment in the road, and it's deteriorating, and we don't have a plan for the maintenance of that asset. So, and you know, a service review in terms of identifying clear levels of service that are being provided. We hear the board wanting to see that more and more, and so that's an investment of time and effort. So we won't be able to do that at this point. But the trade-off, of course, in our mind is worth it. It just needs to be highlighted because it was a priority that was adopted by the board when you approved our service plans. So, but I too am very excited about this initiative. I come from a city where we had multiple partnerships, and this one in particular is very reflective of a partnership that I'm familiar with, and I think it has great potential. So I'm very excited, and I am thrilled that the group too is approaching this in a slow, sustainable manner. And I think, you know, the fact that they've done their work in the last 2 months to get themselves registered as a society is a testament to their seriousness and their capacity to get involved. So I'm pleased to bring this forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, would somebody like to make a motion? Oh, there's no need for one. It's just a receive for information, right? Oh, but Director Seegers had her hand up.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
No, we're not done yet. Annex E.
Well, I mean, we're done.
All right, disaster recovery plan, regional flooding events, Chester House, and pedestrian bridge. Mr. Clarkson, take it away.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chair. So at the January 13th Infrastructure Services Committee meeting, staff presented a disaster recovery plan report identifying several areas that have been impacted by the November 2021 flooding events. At Chester House specifically, both park and Chester House basement were flooded. Bridge access to the park, Chester House, and some of the park grounds remain closed to the public and access for risk management and safety reasons. A structural assessment of Chester House was commissioned in December 2021 and finalized in March 2022. The report confirmed that despite soil and ground saturation, that Chester House and the building itself is structurally sound and in overall good condition. The report also provided comments on the main pedestrian access. The bridge actually requires significant repair and possible redesign. The concrete abutments and retaining walls for the bridge need to be repaired and reinforced. The main support structure of the pedestrian bridge has experienced significant cracking, and the repair strategy needs also to consider future preventative measures against further potentially significant flooding events. Given these findings and professional recommendations, park staff will take the following steps. We'll prepare Chester House and park to reopen for the public and use prior to June 1st of 2022, including a cleanup of the adjacent park grounds, clearing of the alternate access path to the property, and directional signage. We'll also continue to perform regular preventative maintenance, inspections, and repair work on Chester House itself and the park site. The pedestrian bridge and the main access to the property will remain closed for reasons aforementioned. And additional recommendations to investigate the existence and condition of waterproof membrane and the exterior of Chester House foundation walls will be researched further. So the pedestrian bridge and retaining wall planning will both require professional engineering and consulting services, as well as internal project management and oversight. There will be several steps to develop scope, timelines, and cost estimates, including engaging professional services, and there are various permits and approvals required. It is estimated that all this will take between 9 months to a year to conduct. Once completed, considerations for additional resources and any related constraints will be brought forward in a future staff report, most likely through the 2023 budget planning process. At this time, funding is required to move forward with the strategy for Chester Park pedestrian bridge repairs, as well as consideration of future preventative measures against further large flooding events. Staff estimate that consulting fees will be about $25,000, as well as internal project management support of $7,500, or 0.075 FTE. It is proposed that this project be funded through the park's operating reserve for up to a combined $32,500. The operating reserve for function 650 park services currently has an uncommitted balance of approximately $59,000. Staff will continue to also work with the province in order to seek disaster recovery funding to offset the costs. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Well, that preempts one of my questions around emergency BC maybe chipping in. Director McMahon.
Yes, Annex E for Area E, very important. Yes, obviously Chester House is well beloved, and this is good news. Really happy to hear it, that it's going to be operating again. The back entrance, which I notice is now open again, is not as accessible as the pedestrian bridge was. And I'm wondering what we can do to make that, because if people are either loading supplies, say they're, having a wedding, and they're wheeling in supplies, or anybody in a wheelchair wants to try and get in there, that back route is a little sticky. And if the lawn is wet, they'll start sinking in the lawn too. So is staff looking at doing anything about that second entrance?
Thank you for the question. And through the chair, Absolutely. We'll have a comprehensive inspection review of the property as we get closer to the date. We're scheduled to coordinate with facility services. We're going to be taking a look at the property and access in just that light and making sure that things are safe, accessible, opened up, signed directly, and as safe as possible, as well as I guess logistically feasible for people that are going to be using the property. Thank you.
All right, staff for a follow-up?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up because I would have started with that. What he said last, I would have started with in terms of it's not ideal. We recognize that. And there will be shortcomings to this, and accessibility may be one of them, because we'll be limited in what we could do, of course, because we can't start doing much without all sorts of approvals. So we'll do what we can, and I know staff will do their very best, but I think it needs to be recognized that it is a limitation for sure, but at least the park can be open again. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, and it might be a good idea to put a warning when people are booking the facility that the main entrance is not open. My other question is that the water is actually coming at us from two directions. It's coming at us from the creek, but it's also coming at us from the ocean. And the little peninsula that the house is on has been shrinking pretty much year by year. Shoreline stabilization work was done there about 10 years ago, and it seems to have held up pretty well on the front of the property. But are we going to be looking at any shoreline work there, either soon or in conjunction with Chester Park, which also needs serious work?
Thank you for the question. I would suggest that the answer to that is out of scope of this report. So but I'm happy to answer that. We have the board approved money this year for us to do archaeological planning around the foreshore agreement that we put in the application for OBE that extends into Chester Park. So that's the first step in that whole process. So have received communication from OBINA as well as the Elphinstone Community Association around it. Recognize it's a growing concern. It's a concern to staff. But the first step is that we have to get that ARC work, which will probably inform what we can or can't do along the shoreline. So it is flagged, and I'm sure you'll see more to come, but that won't be a very fast process either. Thank you.
Okay, Director Lee, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. It's not a big budget item right now, but it sounds like it's going to flood again. So we're doing some repairs now, which I guess will get us back in service. But should we be planning bigger projects to keep this thing from the basement from flooding, the bridge from washing? Is that stuff we need to start planning for now?
Thank you for the question. I just want to be very clear that this doesn't actually get any of the work done. This is the planning only. So this is the technical and professional engineering experience that we need to come to the table to tell us what we need to do to fix and mitigate further. So we recognize that if we just replace like for like, we're not helping ourselves. So we have no intent of replacing like for like. That's why the bridge will remain closed. So this is to do the planning around if we're to put a bridge back and if we're to keep Chester Park open and Chester House open and not have it flooded in the future, how do we need to course correct? Creek correct? Course correct? But this is for the planning only. So you will see future budget proposals, I have no doubt, that come forward that actually articulate what it's going to cost to get the work done. Again, the hope is that recognizing the province is extremely busy with probably larger priorities than us in terms of flood and recovery. I believe that our recovery officer, I understand, is also the recovery officer. Now, it's totally slipped my mind, but it's another area in the province that has way more damage than we experience, which is probably part of our problem in not being as fast in getting acknowledgement and confirmation on whether or not we'll get recovery funding. So everything to date that the board has approved from a Cliff Gilker perspective and this report perspective, those two projects are for planning only. And so far, we've used reserve for all of our planning and our recovery work, and it is our intent, and we continue to have a communication with the province to get, hopefully, funding to pay back our reserves for some of this work. And there'll be further reports that come forward for the work that needs to be done in Cliff Gilker and on Chester Bridge and retaining wall. Thank you.
Great, thanks. That's just what I was hoping to hear.
All right, Director Hiltz.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just the planning work is 9 months to a year, 12 months. So this time 2023, so not in a 2023 budget proposal, 24. Okay, so that's what it's 2024 budget proposal. Thank you.
All right, Director Lee, your hand's still up. Is that on purpose?
Incompetence.
Oh. Was that on purpose too? All right, no more, I see no more hands up. I do see some motions this time, and I'm hoping somebody would be willing to move those on page 47.
Me. I
Oh,
want to
okay.
move the motion on page 47.
Director McMahon,
Yes,
all right.
the recommendations on page 47. Thank you.
All right, she is moving it, and Director Hiltz is seconding. Any more comments, thoughts, discussions on this? All right, all those in favor? Okay, and that's, I think that was just A, B, D, and F, D, E, and F, who are in the parks function. So I think that was all in favor. So that moves us to adjournment. And Director Seegers,
to adjourn.
what a surprise. Seconded, and all those in favor? No. All right, thank you. Do we have any questions that came in online from any attendees? I don't see anything.
Everybody left after Gambia.
Everybody ran off? Okay. Nothing? Okay, I guess that will conclude this meeting, and thank you all for coming. Do we need IT to do anything?